Hi guys, welcome to Read Instead. I'm Jake. Glad to have you here today. I'm giving you my immediate reaction of the Cartel by Don Winslow, the second book in the Border trilogy. Let's talk about it. Okay, so as you guys know, if you've watched any of my past videos, one of my favorite books and a 5-star read of mine is the first book in this trilogy called The Power of the Dog. I've done a review on that video. You can check it out. On the last video that I made, I talked about the 5 worst antagonists that I've ever read. That book is mentioned in that video, so I would encourage you guys to check those out. But this is the second book. I just finished it this morning. And first off, I want to give you a sort of an overview of the series, because I didn't know that this is exactly what it was going to be until I got maybe a quarter of the way into this book. And then I realized that what Don Winslow is doing in this whole trilogy, I assume the third book that I haven't read yet just continues on the storyline. He's giving you a story, a dramatic story of the Mexican drug trade and the war on drugs, and also America's war on drugs. Both countries, America and Mexico, have both declared a war on drugs at different times, and they've certainly looked a lot different too. But that's what this is. That's what this trilogy is. and I have a little note card here below the camera that you guys obviously can't see, and I wrote on it just as I was sort of brainstorming ideas to talk about it. I used the word dramatized. Don Winslow is telling a dramatized story of the events of the war on drugs and the drug trade. And I'm realizing now that that's not really that's not the right word to use for me to describe it, because usually when people use the word dramatized in regards to a novel or maybe a film or something like that, they're talking about the artist, the author, whoever, made a certain event more dramatized for the screen or for the book. And that's not the right word, because everything that's happened in the past, the decades, this is a decades old problem in Mexico, and as it relates to the rest of the world, the drugs that come out of Mexico and the drug trade is so, drama is not even the right word. It's so it's tragic. It's so tragic, and the carnage and the blood and the loss of life that's taken place is just it's incredible. It's gut-wrenching, and I'll just tell you guys right now that I'm not going to give this book 5 stars from me, because this book is just filled with so much of that just terrible description of what's taking place in Mexico, and Don Winslow writes such well-rounded characters. I'll give you a little example of what I'm talking about. And the reason why I can't give it 5 stars is that, let me just digress for a second. The reason why I can't give it 5 stars is because there's not a lot of resolve in this book, to be honest with you. It's gripping. It'll keep you engaged like the whole way through, and the characters and everything it's very well written, and it's all, I liken it to this, if I can give you the film analogy that I usually do, right? Like Schindler's List, the movie Schindler's List is one of the finest, best movies, I would say, ever made in the history of cinema. But is it one of my favorite movies? No, because it's just so sort of gut-wrenching and hard to watch. And that even has a lot of sort of resolve at the end, you know what I mean, with the whole Schindler's List, and he ends up saving these 1,100 Jewish people and stuff like that. There was heartwarming at the end, but it's just there's just so much carnage and death and tragedy that takes place that I can't. That's not one. I don't think of Schindler's List as one of my favorite films. I put that sort of in this same category. This isn't one of the finest novels ever written. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying there's so much carnage and sort of depressing, tragic events that take place in this book that it's hard for me. I'm not going to give it 5 stars for that reason. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about quickly. Don Winslow has this a way of writing in which he'll start a chapter, and basically he just introduces a new character into the plot and into the storyline, and he does a great job of giving you. He'll spend 12-15 pages of just backstory on this character, and sort of leading up to where they're actually at in that present moment. So when the story actually starts to take off, and how that character enters the story, you already sort of feel like you know this character because he's given you so much backstory. And one particular character in this is a boy from right over the border, Laredo, Texas, a Mexican-American boy that basically when Don Winslow introduces him, he gets into just trying to make a little bit of money running marijuana back and forth over the border. I mean, little bits, just like little dime bags, and enough for an individual person to consume, I suppose. And he's just running back and forth over the border. So basically, just there's some Mexican drug dealers that live right on the border that are selling to people in Texas, and this kid is running back and forth making these deals, and then he starts to think to himself, I need more money than this, and he's from very humble and poor beginnings in Laredo. So, long story short, he gets recruited by this cartel, and this cartel, it's already to the point where they're basically having to sort of have their own armies and death squads, basically, and so they train them in that sort of a way. They go to basically it's like a boot camp. That's what it's described as, and it's telling this boy's experience and the boot camp and stuff like that. And it's not just physical training and weapons training and stuff like that. It's also like mental and emotional training. They need to sort of strip you of any emotion and make you into this just animal, this killing machine. And at the end of the boot camp, let me just give you guys a warning real quick. This is like nasty stuff. At the end of the boot camp, they bring this kid into it's the graduation ceremony, right? And they bring him into a building, and then into a room. And then they say basically the last thing that you have to do to graduate and become a Zeta, a part of this cartel, is do this. And he walks into this room, and there's a guy in there with a rag wrapped around his mouth so he can't scream that much, and the kid has to decapitate that man. And after it happens, the very last line in the chapter, Don Winslow writes, and Choi, the kid, just turned 11 years old. So that's the kind of, at that point I kind of closed the book, and I was like, do I want to keep going with this? Because it's just so dark and sort of terrible, right? Here's a boy, not even a teenager, a boy getting caught up into this and recruited and having his mind just become sick and turned into an animal. And that kid, he's actually followed through the rest of the book. But that's what this is. One of the cool aspects about this is I feel like I've really gotten a sort of a history lesson in the war on drugs and the drug trade out of Mexico. And I never really thought, as a New England Yankee American, I never really, I obviously know what Mexican drug cartels are, and I've known that it's been violent down there and stuff like that, but you don't pay too much mind to it because I don't think it's exposed that much in American news. If it doesn't affect America so much, well, it does. I mean, with the drugs that Americans consume, but that's a whole nother topic for another day. But it doesn't seem like I was ever that much exposed to it, and I found myself really doing my own sort of research and because all the events that take place in these novels, in The Power of the Dog and in this, they're all real events. When there is a massacre at a nightclub between rival cartel gangs, when it's described in this novel, you can go right on Wikipedia and then read about it, and it's like spot on, exactly sort of how it happened. The only difference is, I think Don Winslow sort of takes the luxury of just inserting some characters that we don't know if they exist or not. That's all. That's what I mean by sort of how he just paints a more you know, he's making it into a novel, so he needs to sort of make a storyline that is organized and makes sense and stuff like that. But this is very historically accurate, and it gives you an idea of the fear and the intimidation that just normal Mexican villagers sort of live with. You know, it affects smaller communities, not so much like Mexico City, but you know, just the smaller communities all over the country are affected by it. They have to sort of swear loyalty and allegiance to a particular cartel, and not to mention the corruption thing that's going on. I mean, the government is basically, you know, they act like a cartel themselves, and it's just these certain organizations and entities, cartels, government, sort of all just vying for power. And at the root of it, if you think about it, right, though, at the root of it is, it all has to do with the same thing that provokes most people to go to war and be violent and stuff like that, unfortunately, is money. You know, there's just so much money. I'll give you real quick one of the cartel leaders that are in this book is based on a real cartel leader, and he was caught in 2017. I can't think of his name right off the top of my head, but I was reading about him as I was reading this novel. Like I said, I was going on Wikipedia and reading about it and whatnot. This guy got caught in 2017, and they seized his assets. Ready for this? In the amount of $12 billion. $12 billion. That's more money than any NFL football owner that owns a team. Any of these, like, you know, these billionaires in America that we know. $12 billion. That's how much money is generated. That's just one guy. I mean, there's multiple, you know, cartels and cartel leaders and stuff like that. So you can sort of understand why there's so much vying for power and so much war. I'm glad I read this book. It certainly wasn't a waste of my time or anything like that, and I enjoyed it, and it was gripping, and I was you know, I was really intrigued by it. The only reason why I can't give it a 5 stars like I did The Power of the Dog in this particular novel, there's just a lot more. There's just so much loss and carnage, and it sort of at some point sort of got depressing. And a lot of the characters that Don Winslow introduces, and you start to really enjoy, and you're rooting for them. You know, there's not much resolve or happy endings for anybody or any relationships or any storylines that take place in this book. There's just not. So that's what this is. But I will say, as I always say, if anything that I said to you guys, I would recommend, if you're going to pick up the series, obviously start with the first book, The Power of the Dog. I found that a lot more, I just found it more rewarding, and some of the characters that were in that novel that are not in this novel, I sort of really fell in love with. But still, if anything that I said in this video is intriguing to you guys or interesting, I would recommend picking up the series. Don Winslow is a great writer, no question about it. And I don't know, maybe you'd see it maybe a little differently than I have. All right, till next time, you guys take care.